to today's Facebook Live. Today, we're going to be talking about 3 tips that you can do to make your images look more professional. So I know that many of you, when you're first starting out, if you're new to photography or you're intermediate, your images kind of lack that wow factor. They have that kind of snapshot quality to them, and they don't have that kind of look that you can see from your professional photographers that you admire. Now, there's lots of different components that go into getting a professional looking image, and obviously we can't go through them all today, but I am going to give you 3 quick tips, things that you can do today that are going to help you get more professional looking images. Now, I'm actually just going to pop that up on the screen so that if you dive in, after I've given that introduction, you know what we're going to be talking about. So that's what we're covering today. 3 quick tips that are going to make your images look more professional. Now, if you're new to Live Snap Love and new to the Facebook Lives, then let me very quickly introduce myself. So my name is Audrey-Ann. I'm the founder of Live Snap Love, where I help you learn the ins and outs of your camera so you can beautifully capture your children, your family, and the world around you. Now, if you do happen to catch this live, now I know we're actually at a really awkward time today for many people. Because it's going to be quite early for most of you. Actually, it's probably really, really early in the morning for some of you. So it's probably not a great time for many people. But if you do actually happen to catch this live, plus we didn't announce that I was going live. So if you do happen to catch it live, feel free to leave a comment or a question and I will answer those. And if you are watching this on the replay, then you absolutely can still leave a question. I'll just come back in and answer any questions that you may have. So with that in mind, let's dive in right now to our very first tip for getting your images to look more professional. So the first tip that I have for you is to make sure that you use the right aperture for the scene that you're trying to photograph. Now, there's kind of 2 problems that a lot of people have, depending really generally where they are on their photography journey. So the first one is new photographers, and they tend to use a aperture that is too small for the scene. In other words, you have a kind of larger area in focus. So you're maybe using something like f5.6 or f8 or f11. Now, what that is a kind of middle of the road setting, and that's generally what your camera is going to give you on auto. Because it doesn't really know what you're trying to do, what you're trying to photograph, it tends to stick to kind of middle of the road settings. And when you have middle of the road settings, then you get middle of the road photos. So that's what tends to happen when you're using auto, or you're still picking your own aperture yourself, but you're just not sure what you should be using. So you kind of err on the side of caution and you end up using too small an aperture and getting too much of the scene in focus. And that does just tend to lead to this really kind of snapshot quality to your image because it's got that middle of the road feel to it. So we kind of want to avoid that, and we do want to pick our own aperture, definitely. And what tends to happen then is people then go the other way and they end up choosing too large an aperture, so too small an f number, and they start shooting at something like, f1.8 or f1.4 or f2.0. And what they end up then is with this really narrow depth of field, this very small area in focus. And so that can be great in some instances. It can also mean that you end up with areas of the scene that are important, not in focus. So a kind of common one is when you're photographing a person and you have used such a kind of large aperture, that small f number, and you've ended up with just a portion of the face in focus rather than the whole thing. So rather than getting everything that you want in focus, you'll end up with just the nose, or you'll have that kind of sideways shot and you only end up with one eye in focus rather than the one that's behind. So always make sure that you choose the correct aperture for the scene that you are photographing. So That's really important to making sure that your images don't have that snapshot quality to them, but also to make sure that you have everything that you want in focus. Now, if you're not sure which aperture you should be using, I do have a cheat sheet that's going to help you with this. Let me actually just put up the URL right now. I think you should see that in the bottom of the screen in a minute. Yeah, so if you go to audrianphoto.com/manual-mode, you'll see that there. You can grab a cheat sheet that's going to help you choose the correct aperture number. It's also going to help you with your shutter speed and your ISO settings as well. So you can go and grab that. If you're not sure about which aperture you should be using, feel free to leave a question as well. But also grab that cheat sheet that's going to help you with the aperture that you should be using. So that was tip number one, which was to make sure that you're using that correct aperture for the scene. Now, this does mean that you're going to have to learn about depth of field because, and it's a really important thing to learn about because it's going to affect so many of your photos. So it's probably one of the first things you're going to think about is how much of my scene do I want in focus? Do I want everything from near to far in focus? Do I just want this? All the other factors that affect depth of field. Really think about that, and that's going to help you get the correct aperture for the scene, which is going to help make your images look more professional. Now, excuse me, tip number two that I have is to consider everything that's in the frame. So one of the issues, again, that mainly new photographers have is that they lift the camera to their eye and they start taking a photo and they are so focused on what they can see, their subject, that they forget everything else that's going on in around the frame. So what I want you to do is really concentrate about what is in your viewfinder. When you're looking through that viewfinder, I want you to consider the entire frame and what is inside it. So I want you to look out for things like cluttered backgrounds, things that's distracting from your subject, like brightly colored objects in the background, trees growing out of someone's head, a trash can, a car, anything that is in the frame that shouldn't be there or isn't adding anything to the image. So always kind of ask yourself, is what's in my frame adding or subtracting from the image? And if it's not meant to be there and it's not adding to the image, then you're going to want to take that out, either by moving to a new location or if it's something that can be easily moved out the way, like a brightly colored ball that's pulling the eye, then you can just simply move that out of the way. But have a look through your frame and just make sure that everything that is in that frame is supporting what your intention for the image is. Also have a quick look at the edges of your frame. You never want to be cutting off any body parts. So let me put it this way. You know, when you've got your hand kind of sticking out here and you're chopping off someone's arm or their shoulder or their toes, or you crop them off at the ankle, that is a surefire way to make your images look unprofessional, because a professional will have a sweep around the frame and make sure that everything in it is earning its place. You'll also have that quick sweep around the frame and make sure that they're not chopping off any body parts, particularly things like hands, fingers, toes, chopping off at the ankle. That's really common ones. You never want to crop at a joint, always crop a fleshy part if you are going to crop into a person when you're taking a photo, which of course you will if you're doing a headshot or a body shot. And there was one more thing I was going to say. Oh yes, also just consider the amount of space you're leaving around your subject and why you're leaving it. So what tends to happen, as I said, is people will have their subject in the frame, but they are not they're not really considering how much space they're taking up in the frame, whether they should get closer. Now, there's actually a saying that says, if your photos aren't good, then you're not close enough. And that's definitely not always true. But what that was referring to is the fact that, for example, in this image here, we don't actually need all this clutter around me. It's not helping or aiding anything, but I don't really think you're going to want a close-up of my face. So, but consider, is this background, everything around you, adding to your image? Is it adding context? Is it there to kind of balance the elements in the frame? Is it adding sort of negative space? What's it doing? So again, if you're leaving space around your subject, which can absolutely be fine, consider whether you need to do that. If you do, that's great, leave that in. If it's adding context or it's balancing the visual weight of the frame, or it's just adding context, by all means do that. If not, then maybe consider getting in closer. You always want to make sure that the purpose of your image is clear. So that was tip number 2. And I'm going to scroll right on down now to tip number 3, which is to use the light effectively. And I'm away to cough. Excuse me, that was probably really attractive. So, yes, tip number 3 is to use the light effectively. Now, there's literally nothing more important in photography than light. Now, we talk a lot about our settings. We talk about, aperture and ISO and shutter speed and all the other settings. But we need to learn how to control these so that we can use the light effectively. So in some ways, that's the kind of foundation that we need to learn in order for us to be able to use light effectively. Now, again, there's loads of different ways that you can light your subject. You can light them from the front, from the back, from the side. You can use low light. You can shoot in sunny days. You can use cloudy days. You can shoot during the golden hour. There's so many different types of light and so many different ways that you can use it. So as you progress through your photography journey, you'll find that you want to use different types of light and you want to use them in different ways. But what I do notice a lot from people starting out is that they think that more light is better. So, for example, they think that a sunny day is just great because there's so much light that, that's going to be the best place to take a photograph. And to be honest, it's not. And generally speaking, sunny days are pretty hard to photograph in. Doesn't mean that you can't do it, definitely, but it does mean that it's harder for you to photograph in. And in fact, the worst time of day for you to photograph in is around noon, an hour or so before that and an hour or so after that as well. You don't want the light shining on your subject from above. So if you can imagine taking a flashlight and holding that above your subject's head. So the area you're going to have lit is the top of the head, maybe the nose because it sticks out a bit more, and the area that you're going to have in shadow because they're underneath your eyebrows is your eyes. And of course, your eyes is what you want to have full of light in a portrait because that makes them sparkle, and the eyes really do they're like the windows to the soul, so to speak, but they're the most important thing generally in a portrait. And you want those to be full of light. And when you're lighting something from above, you're not going to get that. So when you shoot at noon and that sun is at the highest point in the sky, that's effectively what you're doing. You're taking a flashlight and you're shining it on the top of someone's head. And that's not how you would want to light somebody. So if you can, and I'm not saying you can never shoot in midday. Of course you can. There's definitely strategies for dealing with that. But if you can, shoot earlier or later in the day. Now, people always say, and you'll hear it time and time again, that the golden hour is the best hour for taking photos. Now, that's the hour after sunrise in the morning or the hour before before sunset in the evening. Now, I personally find it really difficult to photograph during those times, especially if you have kids, up that early in the morning or it's bedtime by the time the sun is setting. Excuse me, I'm going to cough again. Excuse me. So it's, that's not going to work for me. I'm probably not going to manage to photograph during the golden hour. The only time I kind of manage that is in winter when, it's so late in the day when the sun is coming up and it's going away really early on. So I find it easier at those times. But for the most part, I can't manage to shoot during the golden hour. It's not going to work for me. If you can, go for it. Best light you're going to be able to get. But if you can't, that's fine, but just try and get it as close to that as possible. So, if I'm saying the golden hour is 1 hour after sunrise, then you kind of want to go maybe 2 hours, possibly 3 output, but you want to stay away from when the sun is at the highest point in the sky. So that's sort of a kind of basic tip for any new photographers out there. For new photographers, what I would say to you is actually to learn light indoors. And this is what I was saying about many new photographers thinking that, outdoors on a sunny day is best because there's all this light. It's going to be great. Actually, it's not. It's not going to be fantastic. And the best thing you can do is learn about light. And the easiest way to learn about light is to learn it indoors. And the reason for that is because you've got much more control over the light inside. So what you want to do is find a window that is larger than your subject, doesn't have direct sunlight coming through. So if the sun's coming in through the window, you don't particularly want that. But find a window that is larger than your subject, don't have that sunlight coming through, and then practice with the light. You won't have the light coming in from above because your windows are here at the side, and it acts like a kind of giant softbox, the way that you would get that in a studio, for example. So really, natural light coming in through a window is just like a great studio light. So use that, and you can learn about light there. Have your subject face into the light, have them to the side at a 45-degree angle, have the light behind them, and you can really start to play and learn with light then. Now that is the 3 tips that I had for you today. Let's just quickly run through them again. So tip number 1 was to use the right aperture for the scene that you're trying to photograph. So important for bringing your viewer's eye where you want it to be, but also making sure that everything in the frame that is important is in focus. That's going to be crucial. So making sure that you get that right aperture for the scene. The second tip was to consider what's in the frame. Always make sure that everything in the frame supports your image. And it's there because you allowed it to be there. I know I do hear from people that, oh, well, it was just there. The car was just there in the background. Well, it maybe was, but it was your choice to keep it in the frame. So always move, make sure that the background's pleasing to the eye, and do that quick. When you see directors and they do this and they kind of move around, that's essentially what you're trying to do. You're looking at exactly what's in that frame and making sure that everything in the frame is meant to be there, and that you're not chopping off bits that are important in your subject as well. And the final tip was to use light effectively. So we went over a couple of things there, but where you can start learning light first and to avoid midday sun. But I'm just going to end that by saying that light is so important. It's one of the crucial elements of photography. And the reason we want to learn all our settings is so that we can use that light effectively. Because when you can start to shoot in sunny days and in low light, and you can shoot from the side and from the back, that is when you are going to get that wow images that you want. Light is really that key to that wow images. But in order to be able to use that light, you need to be able to effectively choose your own settings. And that's why I always recommend that you shoot in manual mode. It's so important. You don't always have to go on and shoot in manual mode once you've learned how to use it, but you do need to learn how to use it first of all, definitely. Now, you can get help with all your settings. As I said, let me just pop that back up on the screen. You can get help with your settings. Just download that manual mode cheat sheet that we have for you. That's going to help you choose the aperture, the shutter speed, and the ISO settings. And that's going to help you really make sure that you can get your images to look exactly the way that you want them to, and that you can use light effectively. So just head there, go to audrianphoto.com/manual-mode, and you can pick up that totally free cheat sheet, and that's going to help you with your settings. So that's it from me today. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see you guys at the next Facebook Live. Bye for now.